I didn't realize how much I'd been apologizing until I tried to stop. Not for big things, small ones. Tone, timing, the way it came out. We'd been married for 8 years, and somewhere along the way I'd learned that keeping the peace meant constantly smoothing myself down. Friends described us as balanced, emotionally mature. I agreed. I thought compromise was the goal. I didn't understand that compromise only works when both people are allowed to take up space. She was incredibly articulate, calm, thoughtful. If I brought up something that bothered me, she'd listen carefully and then explain why it wasn't what I thought it was. She never said I was wrong outright. She'd say I was interpreting things through emotion instead of logic. Over time, I started doubting my instincts. Whenever something felt off, I'd pause and ask myself how she'd explain it. Then I'd accept that explanation before even talking to her. The first real warning sign wasn't cheating. It was how often she spoke to me. In group conversations, she'd say, "He doesn't really mind," or "He's just tired today." Before I had a chance to answer, it felt harmless. Helpful, even, but I noticed I started letting her do it. It was easier than correcting her. I didn't realize how much of myself I was handing over in those moments. I found out about the affair by accident. We shared a calendar for bills and appointments. One night, while checking dates, I noticed recurring blocks of time labeled personal, always the same day, same hours. When I asked about it, she smiled and said it was her decompression time. Something about the way she said it made my stomach drop. Later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched one of the addresses attached to those entries. It wasn't a gym. It wasn't a cafe. It was a hotel. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. She sighed, like she'd been waiting for me to catch up. She said she hadn't told me because she knew I'd react badly, that I'd make it about betrayal instead of understanding. She said the relationship met needs she didn't feel safe expressing at home. Somehow, her secrecy became self-protection, and my hurt became proof she was right to hide it. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just an affair. It was a story she'd already finished telling. Without me, the days that followed felt rehearsed. She was kinder than usual, more attentive, like she was demonstrating what I'd lose if I stayed upset. When I tried to talk about the hotel, she reminded me that we'd already addressed it, and that continuing to dwell on it wasn't productive. She said healing required trust and forward motion, not obsession. Every attempt to process what happened was reframed as my inability to cope. I started noticing how quickly the conversation shifted from what she did to how I was handling it. The first real twist came when I realized she'd already prepared people for this. A mutual friend asked if I was doing okay and mentioned how hard it must be to support someone through emotional insecurity. That wording stopped me cold. Later, I learned she described me as sensitive and overwhelmed, someone who struggled with change. It wasn't a lie, it was a curation. Any reaction I had now would fit perfectly into the version of me she'd been quietly sharing for months. I asked if she was still seeing him. She said yes, but only to close things properly. When I said that crossed the boundary, she accused me of being controlling. She said ultimatums were unhealthy, and that trust couldn't be rebuilt under conditions. It stunned me how easily my need for safety became a flaw. I started wondering how many of my boundaries had been dismissed this way over the years, labeled as immaturity instead of self-respect. Another twist surfaced quietly. I noticed she'd started writing things down after our conversations. Dates, phrases, summaries. When I disagreed with her version of what was said, she'd confidently quote me back, slightly altered. I began doubting my own memory. I started documenting too, not to win arguments, but to stay grounded. That scared me more than the affair. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was questioning my grip on reality. The moment I stopped explaining myself, everything changed. Her calm cracked into irritation. She accused me of shutting down, of being emotionally unavailable. The same behavior she once praised as mature was suddenly framed as cold and punitive. Watching that switch flip was clarifying. It showed me the rules had never been about communication or growth. They were about predictability. As long as I stayed manageable, everything stayed peaceful. The moment I wasn't, the peace disappeared. Leaving didn't happen in a dramatic moment. It happened the morning I realized I was rehearsing apologies before she'd even spoken. I was exhausted from anticipating how every emotion would be received. When I told her I needed space, she said I was running from accountability. That growth meant staying and doing the hard work. I didn't argue. I packed a bag and stayed with a friend. That first night felt strange, quiet, unstructured. No tone to manage, no narrative to align with. For the first time in years, my thoughts existed without being corrected. The messages came quickly. Some were warm and reflective. Others were disappointed, sharp in a way I hadn't seen before. She said she didn't recognize me anymore, that I'd changed. She was right, but not in the way she meant. Friends I trusted finally heard the full story. A few admitted they'd noticed how often I deferred to her, how carefully I chose my words. One said, "You always sound like you were asking permission." Hearing that out loud hurt. It also made something finally click. Therapy didn't give me answers right away. It gave me language. I talked about the affair, but more about how every disagreement ended with me doubting my reactions. My therapist pointed out how often I described myself using her words. Overly sensitive, rigid, difficult. When asked if those labels felt true outside the relationship, they didn't. That realization was devastating. It meant I wasn't broken. I'd been adapting. Grieving the marriage meant grieving the version of myself I'd slowly edited down to keep things calm. When we finally talked about separating, it was strangely composed. She said she hoped one day I'd understand what she'd been trying to show me, that she wished I were more emotionally involved. I didn't push back. I told her I needed a relationship where honesty didn't come with conditions and where my feelings weren't treated like problems to solve. She looked disappointed, like I'd failed an important lesson. For the first time, that disappointment didn't move me. If you're reading this and something in your relationship feels quietly exhausting instead of supportive, pay attention. Especially if your boundaries are framed as flaws and your emotions as obstacles. Love shouldn't require you to disappear to keep things peaceful. Leaving wasn't empowering in a cinematic way. It was quiet, frightening, and stabilizing. I didn't walk away because I stopped loving her. I walked away because I started trusting myself again. And if clarity feels like a threat to your relationship, that might already be your answer.